Alright, so I had a chance to get this head attached and actually seam everything up. It was a little bit tricky. It was a lot of like getting in close and kind of rigging up like tools and sandpaper to get back between the head over here, because when the head's detachable, it's easier to work out a piece and then attach the head and kind of clean it up. But when you have something attached like this and you got a little bit of a crevice area to work with, it's a little bit difficult. So what I had to do too is kind of Dremel out a lot of the neck area that was around here, only because the way they designed it was like a really thick collar, and then the head and skin kind of like popped out of the collar, kind of like, you know, like if it's a tight collar, your skin and neck is kind of bulging out of it. So I had to kind of rework that. So I kind of looked online, I looked up these muscles, and I sort of rebuilt this area around here. I cleaned up the back of the head, I fixed up back there, so we're pretty much good. The figure is pretty much there. So I'm just going to probably work on the hair tonight, try to get that done. And then what I need to do is just kind of do a quick mold of this hand, so this way we can make a quick copy of it and I can actually sculpt it and make the power burst. And then we can get some really good mold and sort of mold it up this summer or spring once we get a little bit warm weather, and then we can actually make the clear part. And then once that's done, it's just a matter of painting them up. Okay, so as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm trying to follow the comic book art as much as I can. He was never really known to have this like really detailed hair. It's always just kind of like you see a little bit of the line work in the front, and then it just kind of blends out into the back, and it's just kind of solid. It's kind of like the Bone Designs bust too that I have sitting down over here. So it's kind of like this right here, as you can kind of see. You know, the factory probably didn't really mean for it to happen where the blue is kind of showing through the hair a little bit, but I kind of like it, and I think that's what I'm going to do with this. Instead of trying to force it with sculpting, I can do it with paint, where it feels more like the comic book. That's what I really want to do. So what I'm going to do is off camera, I'm just going to kind of clean it up a little bit more, just kind of fine tune it a little bit, make sure everything's even. But I think that's as pretty much as I need to go. I think the back might be a little bit too detailed. I'm going to clean that up. I'm going to kind of clean up all this residue around there. But that's kind of what I really wanted for the hair. I think it feels more like the comic book. It feels more like the, you know, like the Bone Designs statues, and it just feels more like Genis-Vell to me than to try to, you know, do this crazy detailed look and make it all like, you know, textured and flowing hair. I really don't want to go that route. I'd rather feel this be an item more of like he jumped out of the comic book in 1/4 scale on my shelf. That's what I'm kind of going for. So I'm going to kind of clean this up a lot more now off camera, and hopefully by tomorrow it's all cured up. I could get a prime, clean it up, and we can really start focusing on this hand. Okay, so I'm going to make a quick mold of this hand. It's pretty simple. Basically, I'm just going to put some hot glue around this part of the fist. We're going to put it on here on the board, let it kind of cure up, and then I'm going to build a box around it, because I need the mold pouring in this direction, because I need to focus on getting inside the key and around here. If we put the hand this way, the mold's not going to go underneath the key, so you just have to make sure you go in the right direction. I was going to go over to Home Depot and just get some, like, you know, silicone and stuff and make a throwaway mold. Like, I've been watching some videos on YouTube. But I realized I had an old container of Mold Max 30 trial kit from a project I did a few months back. So this is probably like maybe 4 months old, 3 months old. And this stuff doesn't have a long shelf life once you open it. So I opened it up before, and it still seems like it's good enough just to make a quick mold of this hand. So we're going to be able to get away with it. So all you basically need is some foam core, hot glue gun, and some mold. I'm going to mix this up. This stuff takes about 24 hours to cure up. Once it's cured, I can pop out the hand. The mold will be turned this way, and basically I could just pour in some resin and make the key copy, and then we can sculpt out a power blast. And then in a few months' time, once the weather gets warmer, I could get a nice good container of Mold Max 30, a bigger one, and what we can do is we can make a nice 2-part mold, get some clear resin, a trial kit, like a Crystal Clear 2020, and then I can make a really nice good power burst clear hand for the statue. So that's where we're at with this. So basically we'll come back once I start pouring in the mold, and then hopefully tomorrow we can pop it out, and then we can make a copy of it. Okay, after a couple of tries, I got this lined up to where I wanted, because I'm looking at this direction and I'm looking at this direction. So I want to really line it up the way the hand was, because the way the hand wasn't straight out, it's kind of bent down. So I gave it to where it's down here where the fist would be. I'm trying to line that up where the fist would go. But other than that, I think we're in a good position. So you can kind of see it from that angle. And that's kind of like how I wanted it to be. So what I'm going to do is let this cure up for the night. Because this part I did the other day, this part I just did now. And then what I'll do is I'll fill in here with some, you know, tin foil. Then I'll fill in the front a little bit. Sand some of this down. And then start doing some like textured and stuff around here. And then I just got to work on this piece to design how it's going to connect into it and where it's going to connect. It's going to connect somewhere at the bottom around there. I just got to kind of Dremel in, work it in, and then probably buff it out after I use some Aves. But other than that, that's kind of like when I envisioned for the Blas, because you figure when this is all cleared up resin and this is sort of painted at the over here with just a little bit of the gold, I think this will kind of look really cool looking, like it's a Blas coming out. What I'm going to do is maybe some line stuff around here, but whatever I do, I have to think about the casting wise, because you could do some really cool intricate stuff, but when you go make the mold, it might be a nightmare and it might cause issues. So I also have to keep that in mind when I do it. But we're slowly getting there. I think it's going to work out pretty cool once done. Okay, so I got the Power Blast all finished up. What I did is I went around some areas and I fixed anything that would have been like air bubbles and stuff. This is kind of like how his powers look like in the comics. I picked up a bunch of them. What it is, it's kind of like all bubbly up top, but then it comes into a Power Blast going outwards. And the Power Blast is always big from the hand. I'm not really a fan of like clear resin pieces from statues where they do this power burst, but then it comes into a little point. I understand they do that for production reasons and also casting and, you know, to tell a story. But I don't see why it's not a big deal just doing something this big and then you kind of like cut it off at the point. I think it's fine. It tells the story and it gives a little bit more of a power blast, like shooting out. Plus the other thing too is it feels more like Marvel vs. Capcom artwork where it's like you always get that big blast coming out of the area in the, you know, if you look at the sprites and the animation. So the other problem I'm running into is like, what do I do with this clear piece here? If I drill a hole into this piece here like that, it works, you know, and I can leave it like that. But the only problem is I'm not really a fan of that. So the other thing too is if I swap out this hand and I put in the regular hand, this piece just kind of falls over the edge like that. And I don't want to drill this into going into the other hand either. So what I'm thinking of doing is two things. One, I'll cast this up, and then if I decide to, what I'll do is from the beginning, I'll just kind of drill a little hole and glue this in, or kind of just like attach it in. And then if I feel that that's not really where I want it to be, what I could do is I could use a blow dryer, heat this up, and I could bend this around and kind of connect it with some glue over here, which I think I'm going to do anyway. I think it's better just to kind of like let this kind of be like a circle piece like that. I think that works out better. So this way, if I ever want to swap out the regular hand, I don't have to worry about any kind of connections or this piece scraping this or whatever. No matter what happens, this stuff is going to always sag though because this is kind of soft resin and over time it's going to sag. So even if you have the, you know, Green Lantern piece and you have it connected to his finger, it probably will still sag on you and stuff, but that's not the end of the world. It's fine. You know, sometimes if it sags and it gets stuck in there and this paint kind of dries to it, you know, you probably have to do some touch-ups or something, but we'll see how that works down the line. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm probably going to start prepping this for molding and casting. So we're going to make a box for it. We're going to put in some clay. I already marked out where I'm going to put the split of the two-part mold with some marker on each side here. So this way I'll be able to make this mold, get this done in clear resin, and put it on. What I might do too is I might put a very tiny drop of some UV yellow dye that I've had for a long time. It's very old stuff, but I think I got enough just to put a little bit of a drop in there just to give this some yellow tint. It doesn't really need to be super clear, but we'll see what happens. I might not, maybe I'll leave it clear, but I think just adding a little bit of yellow tint in there might help it, because the stuff I'm going to use is the smooth on crystal clear stuff, which is pure like clear. But yeah, I just need to get this mold and cast it before I run out of this warm weather for the summer. So I'm going to start getting a box up now. We're going to put some clay in there, get it situated, pour one side of the mold, and then we'll do the other side of the mold, and then we'll pour in the resin. And then after that, once this piece is casted up, or at least I have a mold of it, I can always make 2 or 3 copies of it just to do some tests. Like one, I can make a copy of it. I could put a test in there where I can actually drill into it and see how it sits in there. And then I could do another one where you know, I kind of just attach this to here and I don't do it. So I can actually make 2 or 3 copies of this, which is fine. But after that, once I've finished this piece up here and I decide how this works, he's ready for paint. Okay, so I got my box all made up. It's just hot glue with foam core all around it. I try to keep it as small as possible. I don't really want to make huge molds. I'm not making like 30 or 40 copies of this. I just need 1 or 2 just for my personal use. So I'm trying to save as much room as possible with the mold and make sure it works. So basically at the bottom is oil-based clay. You pretty much use a hair dryer. You kind of soften and melt it up. You push it down. You push your piece in there and you get it all set up. I did do a video series on how to mold make, so if you really want some in-depth information, you can check those out. I'm still not a pro at all this, but you know, I'm just going as I learning and practicing just makes perfect. So what's going to happen is we're going to mix up my mold, which is Mold Max 30 from Smooth On. What I'll do is I'll pour it in this side, just enough to go over here. It's not going to come all the way up top, just enough to go over the piece. I'm going to cut up some old mold that I've done in the past to use as filler. So this way I don't have to use a lot of fresh mold because I'm working on a couple other projects and I need to spread it out. And then once this is cured up after 24 hours, what you do is you put a piece of foam core over here, you tape this side, you flip this over, you cut out the bottom part of it, and then you take out the clay, because this piece should get locked into the mold, and you just got to be careful about that. And then after that's done, basically you do the other side with some mold release. You got to spray mold release between the sides, and then you put your other side in, and then you can split it, and we'll get it to later. Now, there's only one trouble I'm going to have. It's getting the piece in here. Now, if I was going to be doing, like, you know, I don't know, like 30 of these pieces, then I would make the mold bigger, so this way I could pour the mold in there. So what's going to happen is, when I pour the mold in, I'm going to have to kind of turn it on its side and sort of pour the mold in this way and let it kind of fill in there. And hopefully I'll get all the mold in there. I might not, but once I get enough mold in there, I could kind of turn it on its side and hopefully some bubbles will come out. We'll see. I mean, it's not the end of the world. I can always go in there with a Dremel tool and clean it up a bit, because this is going to get painted gold anyway, and this is going to be clear, so I'm not worried about how this is going to work out. I got some ideas on how it's going to work, but we'll get to that later. So for right now, we just need to make a good clear piece and go from there. So I'm going to get into the garage now. I'm going to mix up all this mold, get this situated, and then hopefully in like 3 days we're ready to start pouring. Okay, so this mold is pretty much set up. What I did is I flipped it over and I pulled out all the clay. I cleaned it up. So now what I have to do is spray some mold release all around in here, make sure I get everywhere, and then I mix up another batch of mold and I pour it on here, and then I'll be able to separate it into a 2-part mold. So that's where we're at right now. We're getting closer to casting this up in clear resin. Okay, so I had a chance to get into the garage and use the last of my little trial kit of the 200 crystal clear. That stuff cures very fast compared to the other crystals. So I figured let me use up this clear resin before the winter comes, because once you open up resins and clear resins and stuff, they only have a shelf life, and I don't like to keep stuff over the winter, especially when you need heat for the clear stuff. So I did 2 of them, and they worked out just fine. A little bit of casting errors, but it's not the end of the world. You can see there's a little bit of an air bubble here. It's not the air bubble in the resin, it was an air bubble in the mold, so this way it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of coming out like a little bump there. So what I have to do is kind of just Dremel that out a little bit, and then what I have to do is I have to Dremel out this little key piece right here from the original metal, and I'll Dremel into the area, and what I'll do is I'll put Aves in there with the rod, so this way the rod gets hidden. I might even paint the rod a little bit too white, so it'll look like there's some kind of like white beam in here, so then when I paint all this yellow, or a yellowish tint, it kind of looks like there's a little bit of a white in there. Now the other thing too is this up here got kind of messed up. What happened is, when I didn't pour my mold here, the clear resin came all the way above here. You can actually see how this comes off the top, so I had a lot of extra clear resin up here. But what happens is, I guess the clear resin sort of had a bunch of air bubbles, so as those air bubbles got away, it kind of sunk down a little bit. But that's not the end of the world, because what I'll do is I'll just kind of chop this up and sand it down and buff it, and it's not really going to matter, because this end piece isn't really worried. I'm worried about all this compared to this. So we're all set up with these. Like I said, I did 2 of these because I figured let me just do 2 in case one I mess up or I don't like the way it's looking. I can always take the other one out and redo it as a backup. And also, like I said, I also had to use up the clear resin. But we're pretty much ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'll have to clean these up. I'm going to Dremel in there. We'll come back when I'm ready to Dremel in. We'll get that installed in there. We'll get it onto the statue. And then once that's installed, we just have to pretty much clean him up, and we'll be ready to start painting. Alright, so we're going to get this metal rod into the piece that I worked on. So at first I tried to Dremel in there and create that little white piece in there, but what happened is this is going on an angle, so it's kind of going up this way instead of straight on. It's just the way the sculpt and wrist and all that worked out. So on my second one, what I decided to only go a little bit further in, just not that far, and I think this is going to work out better. What I did is I buffed out the piece up there and cleaned this up. Once I clear coated and everything, that'll come out together. I really buffed it up a lot, but it's just a little cloudy. So what I did is I mixed up some Magic Sculpt. I also made my metal rod, so I got my metal rod here, as you can see, and I did some notches at the top. So I want to make sure that this metal rod clicks in there like so. And what I'll do is I'll put some Magic Sculpt in here, and I'll get this set up. I'll use some masking tape, and I'll hold it over for a few hours. And then hopefully by then it'll be ready to go where you can pop this out and you can swap the hands and stuff. So once I get this attached, I'm going to have to get it into the base, and then I'm going to have to find out where I might want to drill a little bit of a hole so that clear piece can connect into it. And then once that's done, just kind of clean up the whole item, make sure there's no errors here and there, and we can start painting. Okay, he is pretty much all set up. The clear piece is all worked out. The metal rod is in there perfect. It magnetizes into his hand, so that locks into place. I dremeled out a little tiny hole here, so this piece connects underneath of it. The only bad thing is this kind of sort of rests on there. There's nothing I can really do about that. It's the way this clear resin is. If I bend this upwards and try to do something up here, then the clear resin hits underneath here. It's just one of those things where I'd rather let it sit on this hand, and then if any paint or stuff gets messed up over time, what I can do is I can always try to chop this up over here, sand it down and blend it out, and then I can always use this hand too. So there's always options down the line, but that's kind of the nature of this clear stuff. The way it was designed was to go into the hand with the ring, so this way it really doesn't hit anything, but this stuff could really soften up very fast. And then the other thing too is I'm concerned about is this piece back here. This magnet is supposed to kind of lock into his back, but it really is not that strong. So I think what I'll do is by the time we come back, I'll have maybe a new magnet system in here so this piece really locks in and holds him, because I'm afraid that over time this will start sagging backwards. He'll stay fine with the metal rod system in there, but I really rather have this kind of locked into place and really hold it better. So I think I'm going to have to do that down the line. But other than that, I'm happy with the way he came out. I'm just going to have to do a lot more sanding, wet sanding, fixing up any scratches, and just really prep them up a little bit more, just to kind of make sure everything is nice and clean. I might have to go over the base one more time too, just to kind of clean up some areas. Even though there's a lot of green down here, what it is that green is really on a lot of the rocks. It's not on the clear. And any of these little spots here are pretty much where the rocks are coming out of the base, so that'll get painted up anyway. Now the other thing too is I got to kind of plan out how I'm going to do the yellows. When we come back, we're going to start working on the figure first, get him done, get him out of the way. Only because you know, we're in the fall now, and I really don't want to be doing any of this type of paint up in the winter. So I want to try to get it as far as I can. The yellow stuff on the base is a little bit tricky. I could go Tamiya clear yellow with my car paint, and I know that works out very well and it's durable. But the only problem is I'm not sure how well of a give it would have, because if this stuff starts bending, it might start cracking off there. I'm not really sure. But there's also Spaztec clear yellow and then Spaztec clear, and that stuff is really good because it's made for like those RC car shells where they get kind of banged up a lot. Plus, if they're gas powered, that gas fumes doesn't really melt any of the paints or defect it. So, but the only problem is I've had problems in the past is when you do the clear over it, really doesn't like, sometimes it reacts weird and doesn't work. I don't know, I have to kind of do some tests. Maybe I'll do like a test at the bottom of the base first, and if it works out, I'll run with it with the Spaztec, only because the Spaztec, I could sit there and I could spray the whole thing down out of the can and I'm done. Whereas the Tamiya stuff, I got to sit there with the airbrush and make sure I do nice even coats. We'll see. We'll come back when we're ready to do that. So next video when we come back, we're going to start painting him up, so everything should be done. And then hopefully before the winter time, he'll be all finished up and on my shelf.